I just want to thank firstly the speakers and the witnesses for coming in today. I have a number of questions, and I think probably a lot of them really are going to be more relevant for the department this afternoon. I want to ask you specifically, Deputy Murnane O'Connor mentioned it around the adult day services. Have you any understanding of when they are going to reopen, what guidelines? They seem to have not gotten any information or guidelines, and it's a huge concern in that sector. So has anybody on the witness list there, do they have any information on that in relation to adult day services specifically? That's the first question.
The guidelines that have been issued by the HSE don't contain dates on quantum of service within them. The only reference to quantum of service is to say that it'll be a reduced level. Anecdotally, we've heard back from some people that their family member will, the service will begin to ramp up after the August holidays. We've had contact from a few folks saying September 7th seems to be a date that a couple of services have given out. Worryingly, a few folks have indicated they're looking at December and January.
Thanks very much for that. That's actually shocking to think that people would have to wait that length of time, but to a certain extent in relation to people with disabilities or additional needs, we just seem to continuously fail people consistently in that category, and we're always seem to be talking about, and not even in relation to COVID, in general, the waiting lists and the fact that it's everything is just a battle and you have to always seem to be accepting a different standard. It's really, really frustrating, and I can't even imagine what it must be like for people themselves and their families. That kind of brings me into the next question, which is, are you aware of, was there ever a specific person appointed to the NEFIT committee or to tie in with NEFIT in any way in regards people with disability? Because it seems to me like they've been totally forgotten about, and I know you can't have absolutely everybody on a committee, but it does seem that it was a very crucial category that they didn't provide for.
Present the disability people in on NEFIT, and I would agree it's a big, like the subgroup, the subcommittee. We represent the vulnerable disability on the vulnerable subcommittee of NEFIT, and it has been difficult. Obviously, it's a big committee. There's like over 30 on it. The one thing I would say is
maybe
that
try to speak a little more loudly. Sorry.
Sorry. The one thing I will say, the one thing I will say is that it has allowed, because of the broad breadth of representation, like disability in the pandemic wasn't going to be resolved by health alone. So the really good thing about the Vulnerable Subcommittee is you had the COVID response. The community COVID response was also sitting and reporting into that committee. And many people with disabilities and their families were really dependent on the local responses that were happening ad hocly through the community response. And so whilst we, and I would say within disability, within HSE, we did do a very, we committed to responding and putting in place as best we could an initial emergency response to the pandemic. Any issues that we as a sector felt could not get resolved, we did have the capacity to then escalate it up to NEFIT. I think that having less than 16 people, 16 too many, but 16 people with disability in residential services to pass away as a result of COVID, I suppose does speak volumes when you look at what happened in the difference between us and our counterparts within nursing homes. And I would partially say it's because we had that link in between it. There are some outstanding issues. I do think as the decisions around wearing a face mask is definitely a problem for the deaf and hard of hearing, and that's an ongoing issue that we still have with NEFIT, as we do with the whole issue to do with which some of you have brought up here today, which is the whole thing is how you're going to support those to continue to cocoon who are medically vulnerable. There are two outstanding issues that we're still waiting for NEFIT to give clearer guidance to our sector on.
With all due respect, I would say there's a lot more than those as outstanding issues, because I don't think I've spoken to anybody with a disability or their families that find the response to date acceptable. I mean, people have just been totally abandoned. The PA hours cut, home help is not coming in. You know, just no dates, as it was just clarified there, for the resumption of some services, December, January. You know, and already a sector that was so overburdened with waiting lists, and like even from a children's point of view, for example, all the various therapies, so many of them have regressed. So I think, and that's why I think it's important that there would have been somebody. I know it's not necessarily a decision for yourselves, but we can bring it up with the department later, but I just think that this group has been abandoned. And just on the point of masks, a number of people have contacted me over the last few days since that announcement was made, particularly in relation to people with autism and people with sensory issues around having to wear a mask. And, if that's not made clear, and also if it's also not made clear in the public, people will start, there'll be this whole thing about why aren't you wearing a mask? So it's really important that that's made absolutely clear. Otherwise, you're saying to people with disabilities, stay inside your house and don't bother ever interacting. And it's really important that that's not the message that goes out. I have one last point, and it's on the UNCRPD. I just want to ask the opinion of witnesses. If we had ratified the optional protocol, which we still haven't, and we need to do in this country, but if we had, how would the situation have been different? Because I think myself, people would have had a little bit more power, because they would have known that they would have had the right to potentially take a case to the UN. So I'd just like to see your opinions on that. That's it. Thanks, Chair.
That in a sense, often what happens, change comes about because one individual is able to very concretely demonstrate how the state has failed. So I think if the optional protocol had been acceded to by Ireland, I think it might have made a difference in the sense of the ability to demonstrate very concretely the impact on an individual. It's unfortunate that has to happen. It often happens in situations that change is brought about because of a very visible example of where the state has failed. But I mean, it's very clear the state itself doesn't need the protocol to know what has to be done. We know what has to be done, and it's really about the issue of delivering on the promise that the state has made with regard to human rights and equality. And the equality speaks to the part that really we need to have participation by all the citizens. And in order for certain people to be able to participate, they need the supports that have been spoken about here today. And that is to allow them to participate and live a full life where their human rights are respected and where they're equal to all citizens of the states. That's what it's about. But I think you have a point with regard to the protocol, and I think that's obviously something the state should address. Thank you.
I just want to come back in on a point that you made, and it's just really important to see there's a little bit of time.
Fine Gael, Deputy... Deputy McCarthy, Dr McCarthy, but very briefly, please. Yeah,
just to say, just a really interesting and a very important point, and I'm hoping it's something that will resonate with the committee. And you talked about the lack of clarity around the community supports, and I think that's something that I suppose one of the main messages we want to leave today is the fact that whilst NEFIT did provide a pathway to understanding and looking in at residential services and the challenges there, we really need in this break before the next wave, or if the next wave should come, that we provide the same level of clarity to the community supports, those PA and the home supports, that there's an expectation that NEFIT will give those guidance and will invest in those services so that families and individuals aren't feeling left abandoned like they are right now. So it's really important.
Thank you very much.
The point.
I'd like to bring